25 years behind bars for a crime he never committed. And the justice system fabricated evidence to cover it up. Attorney Maya Thompson uncovered the shocking truth. But when she tried to expose it, she was threatened, suspended, and lost everything. Still, she refused to back down. In the final hour, she brought the entire system crashing down. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. If you believe the truth must be told, watch until the very end." Federal Courthouse, New Orleans. A sweltering summer morning. The sun glared off the courthouse's glass facade, casting sharp reflections onto the asphalt below. Heat shimmered in waves off the pavement, and the slow crawl of traffic filled the Thi-Ho air with the occasional honk, breaking the stillness of the early hours. Inside her office, Maya Thompson sat at her dark wooden desk, eyes scanning the thick case file in front of her. The ceiling fan above turned lazily, humming a low, steady rhythm. The faint scent of coffee lingered in the air, though her cup had long since gone cold. She had received the case of Darnell Carter that morning, a name she had never heard before. But the moment she opened the file, something in her gut told her something was off. She flipped to the first page, where the bold black letters spelled out, Darnell Carter, Visor, the state of Louisiana. Just beneath, the case details stood stark against the paper. Charge, first-degree murder sentence, life without. Parole time served, 25 years. The conviction rested solely on the testimony of one eyewitness, James Holloway. No fingerprints at the scene, no DNA match, no physical evidence tying Darnell to the crime. Just the word of a known drug addict with a history of theft and fraud. Maya frowned, flipping through the pages faster now. She had seen wrongful convictions before, but something about this case felt different. Too simple, too clean, and yet something was very, very wrong. She picked up her phone, scrolled through her contacts, and called an old friend, Ben Carter. The line barely rang twice before he answered. "Ben, I need you to pull the witness statement from the Darnell Carter case," she said, cutting straight to the point. "Something doesn't add up." Silence. Then, Ben's voice dropped lower, as if he were looking over his shoulder. "Maya, that case is dangerous. Leave it alone." Her grip on the phone tightened. A strange unease settled in her chest. "Dangerous how? What do you know?" Ben exhaled, hesitating. "Just take my advice. If you want to stay safe, walk away." Maya stared down at the file on her desk. There was something buried in these pages, and she knew she wasn't going to walk away. An hour later, she was still at her desk, eyes fixed on crime scene photos. She picked up an image of the alley where the murder took place. The dim glow of a street lamp cast jagged shadows across cracked pavement. A long streak of blood trailed down an old brick wall in the corner of the frame. Maya narrowed her eyes. That doesn't make sense. If the victim had been shot from the angle the report claimed, why did the blood pattern run in the opposite direction? She set the photo down and flipped to the next page, searching for details on the eyewitness, James Holloway, a repeat offender. Multiple arrests for theft and fraud. And yet, somehow, his testimony had been enough to lock a man away for 25 years. Her phone buzzed. A new message from Ben. "Stop digging, Maya. There are people you don't want to cross." She barely had time to process the words before a chill crept up her spine, a sudden, unshakable feeling. She was being watched. Slowly, she lifted her head, scanning the office. The door was still shut, the blinds drawn. She was alone. And yet, the feeling remained. From the window, just beyond the glass, A shadow flickered. Then it was gone, swallowed by the restless movement of the crowded New Orleans streets. Maya's grip tightened around the file. She had uncovered something far bigger than just a wrongful conviction. Outside Maya Thompson's office window, the New Orleans sky hung heavy and gray. Sudden bursts of rain pelted the streets, then faded just as quickly, leaving shallow puddles on the sidewalks. The city carried a damp, oppressive weight. But inside Maya's office, the pressure was far worse. She sat at her desk, one hand flipping through stacks of documents, the other gripping a pen so tightly her knuckles turned white. Piles of case files towered in front of her, each one marked with yellow sticky notes. She had spent hours dissecting every detail, yet an unshakable unease gnawed at her. Opening the forensic report, she scanned the DNA analysis of the blood found at the crime scene. Then her heart stopped. The report stated that the blood did not match the victim's DNA. Maya blinked, reading it again, making sure she hadn't misinterpreted it. She reached for the prosecution's trial records, cross-referencing the information presented in court. But the case file told a different story. The blood at the scene belonged to the victim. It was a key piece of evidence used to convict Darnell Carter. A slow chill crept down her spine. Why the discrepancy? She flipped to the witness list. James Holloway, the drug addict and repeat offender, was the only person who had claimed to see Darnell Carter leaving the crime scene. But something about his testimony felt off. She scrolled through the interrogation transcripts. June 15, 1999, 10:00 a.m. Holloway stated he hadn't seen anyone. June 15, 1999, 2:00 p.m. Holloway suddenly changed his story, claiming he had witnessed Darnell Carter at the scene. This wasn't just a lapse in memory. This was coercion. Maya sat up straighter, her grip tightening around the pen. Someone had forced Holloway to change his testimony. She needed to confirm it. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at a familiar name. Henry Wallace, a former New Orleans PD investigator. He had left the force years ago after blowing the whistle on corrupt officers. He wasn't the trusting type, but if anyone knew how evidence was manipulated within the system, it was him. She pressed call. The phone rang 3 times before a deep, guarded voice answered. "Who is this?" Maya didn't waste time. "Henry, it's Maya Thompson. I need to talk to you about the Darnell Carter case." Silence. She could hear his slow, heavy breathing on the other end. Then, finally, his voice came through, weary but cautious. "You're digging into something much bigger than you realize, Thompson." Her stomach tightened. "I know. And I need your help." Henry exhaled, the sound laced with something almost like regret. "Are you sure you want to keep going?" Maya didn't hesitate. "I don't have a choice." Another long pause. Then his tone shifted, growing more serious. "I can't talk over the phone. Meet me at Bourbon Bean Cafe in the French Quarter. 9 o'clock. Come alone." "I'll be there." The line went dead. Maya stared at her phone, unease coiling in her gut. Henry Wallace wasn't easily intimidated. If he was too afraid to speak over the phone, then whatever she had uncovered was dangerous. She gathered her files, tucking them into her bag. Outside, the rain had left streaks against the window, like faded evidence of something erased. At 8:45 p.m., Maya parked a block away from Bourbon Bean Cafe, scanning her surroundings. The cafe was tucked into a quiet street, its warm yellow lights spilling onto the pavement. Inside, patrons sat scattered at tables, some lost in their phones, others engaged in hushed conversations. She stepped inside, her gaze sweeping the room until she spotted him. Henry sat in a dimly lit corner by the window. He looked older than she remembered, his face gaunt, dark circles under his eyes, graying hair unkempt. He wore a worn leather jacket, his sharp gaze flickering with unease. Maya pulled out a chair and sat across from him. "Tell me what I'm dealing with." Henry studied her for a moment, then reached into his jacket pocket and slid a small USB drive across the table. "This is an audio recording from 1999, he said. A conversation between James Holloway and a detective. They forced him to change his statement. Maya picked up the USB, her fingers ice cold against the plastic. "Why are you giving this to me now?" Henry exhaled heavily, guilt shadowing his features. "Because I stayed silent for too long." Maya clenched the USB in her hand, feeling the weight of it. The truth was no longer buried, but now she was a target for those who wanted it to stay that way. Henry's voice dropped lower. "You need to leave New Orleans tonight, Maya, if you want to stay alive." She held his gaze for a moment before something outside caught her eye. A black car idled down the street. Its headlights were on. No one stepped out. A warning, a chill crawled up her spine. They knew she was here, and she was running out of time. After meeting with Henry and receiving the USB containing critical evidence, Maya didn't drive home right away. Instead, she took a deliberate route through New Orleans, weaving through side streets, making abrupt turns, doubling back. Anything to be sure she wasn't being followed. But no matter what she did, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The dashboard clock read 11:23 p.m. as she turned onto a narrow road near the warehouse district. This part of the city was far from downtown, mostly abandoned warehouses, dark and deserted. At night, she glanced in the rearview mirror. A black SUV was following her, keeping just enough distance to avoid suspicion. Maya pressed her foot on the gas. The SUV sped up. She slowed, pulling toward the curb as if preparing to stop. The SUV did the same. No doubt now. They were following her. Before she could react, a black Ford Crown Victoria shot out from the intersection ahead, blocking her path. Maya slammed the brakes, her pulse hammering in her ears. The front doors of the Crown Vic opened, and two men stepped out. One of them was Officer Patrick Owens, a cop from the New Orleans PD, the same man she had gone up against in a police misconduct case last year. The other was taller, broader, with cold, unreadable eyes. Owens approached her car, tapping the window with his knuckles. Maya exhaled slowly, rolling it down just enough to hear him. "Is there a problem, officer?" Owens leaned in slightly, his expression unreadable. "You're driving a little recklessly tonight, counselor." Maya kept her voice steady, but her body was already bracing for a confrontation. "I didn't realize driving under the speed limit was an offense." The second man stepped closer, his voice low and even. "You should know when to stop." Maya didn't flinch. This wasn't a routine stop. Owens leaned in further, lowering his voice, so only she could hear. "You have nothing to prove, Thompson. Don't make yourself a problem." Her fingers curled around the steering wheel. This was a warning. If they had wanted to harm her, they wouldn't be standing here talking. "I won't stop," she said slowly, deliberately. Owens studied her for a long moment, then let out a quiet chuckle, as if debating whether she was brave or just stupid. He tapped the roof of her car. "Then good luck." Both men stepped back. The Crown Vic pulled away, vanishing into the darkness. Maya sat motionless, her heartbeat still pounding in her chest. She had pissed off the wrong people, and now They were, watching her every move. When she finally made it back to her Garden District apartment, she barely had time to set down her bag before her phone rang. Unknown number. She hesitated before answering. A calm, composed voice came through the line. "Maya, you have a promising career ahead of you. Don't throw it away over a nobody." Her grip on the phone tightened. Richard Whitmore. A quiet chuckle. "I've always admired your intelligence." Maya inhaled slowly. "If you're calling to threaten me, you're wasting your time. I don't scare easily." Whitmore's tone dropped, colder now. "Maya, you're playing a game you can't win. This system isn't built for people who want to change it. It's built for those who know how to use it." She leaned back against the chair, staring at the ceiling. "You talk like you are the system." Whitmore laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "Not me, but people like me. And you can't beat them." Her jaw tightened. "We'll see." A pause. Then Whitmore spoke again, slower this time, like a father explaining something to a stubborn child. "Do you know what happens to people like you, Maya?" She didn't answer. "They lose everything. Their jobs, their reputation, sometimes even their lives." She let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Then I guess I'll see how many I can take down with me." Another long silence. Then Whitmore sighed. "Do you really think you can win?" "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know I won't stop." A beat of silence. Then Whitmore's voice came through, ice cold. "Then you've already chosen your fate." The line went dead. Maya set her phone down, staring out the window. A car was parked just down the street, headlights still on. They were still watching her, but she had nothing left to lose. The next morning, as Maya stepped into the office, she felt it immediately. Something had shifted. Her colleagues avoided her gaze. Some lowered their heads, pretending not to notice her at all. She had just set her bag down when George Miller, the city's chief public defender, appeared at her office door. "Maya, my office?" "Now!" She followed him, her stomach twisting with the weight of inevitability. Miller shut the door behind her, sighing heavily before sliding a folder across the desk. "I just got the directive from above. Maya, you're suspended. Effective immediately. Violation of investigative procedure." Her eyes widened. "Violation?" "I was doing my job." Miller's gaze was apologetic. "They're saying you obtained evidence illegally, contacted a witness outside the proper channels." Maya let out a bitter laugh. "So they want me to shut up." She stood, grabbing her bag. "I won't stop, George." Miller exhaled, rubbing his temple. "I know. They could take her job, but they couldn't take the truth." Maya walked out of the public defender's office, the weight of the case files pressing against her shoulder. The oppressive New Orleans heat wrapped around her, thick and suffocating. But it was nothing compared to the fire of what she was carrying. They had taken her job, but they couldn't take the truth. She scanned her surroundings carefully. Since her suspension, the feeling of being watched had only intensified. She had started noticing the same cars appearing on her route home, the same figures lingering on street corners too long, the same glances that quickly averted when she looked back. They wanted her afraid, but she had gone too far to turn back now. Maya pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts, stopping at a familiar name: Sarah Milton, an investigative journalist at the New Orleans Tribune. Travritz had built a reputation for exposing corruption, unafraid to go after powerful figures in the city. If anyone had the guts to bring this story into the light, it was her. Maya pressed call. The phone rang twice before Sarah answered, her voice cautious. Maya? Sarah, I need to see you. Right now. I have a story the entire city needs to hear. A pause. You sound tense. What is this about? Maya looked down at her bag, filled with everything she had uncovered. A wrongful conviction. A cover-up that's lasted 25 years. And I have the proof. Sarah exhaled. Meet me at my office. 8 p.m. Be careful. Maya ended the call, taking a slow, steady breath. Tonight, everything would change. 7:45 p.m., Maya parked a block away from the New Orleans Tribune and scanned the street. During the day, this area was buzzing with life. At night, it was eerily quiet. Just flickering streetlights and the occasional car passing by. She stepped out, pulling her bag close, and walked briskly to the building. Inside, Sarah was already waiting in her office, the cool, fluorescent light, casting sharp angles on her focused expression. Maya, Sarah said, eyes searching her face. Tell me you have something real. Maya didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her bag and placed Henry's USB on the desk. Sarah stared at it before picking it up. What's on this? Maya folded her arms. A recording from 1999. A conversation between James Holloway and a detective. They coerced him into changing his statement to convict Darnell Carter. Sarah hesitated, then plugged the USB into her laptop. The grainy audio crackled through the speakers. I didn't see anyone. I don't know who shot him. Then another voice, cold, threatening. Do you want to spend the rest of your life in prison for petty theft, James? Or do you want a chance to walk free? But all you have to do is say Darnell Carter did it. Cooperate and your record disappears. No more warrants, no more cops breathing down your neck. You'll be free. Sarah paused the recording, her eyes wide. Jesus, Maya. This is career-ending evidence. Maya nodded. It gets worse. I have forensic reports proving the blood at the crime scene didn't match the victim. The prosecution altered the reports to fit the false testimony. Sarah leaned back, absorbing the weight of it all. You realize what you're about to do? If we publish this, it won't just take down Richard Whitmore. It'll shake the entire New Orleans justice system. Maya's voice was firm. That's the point. Sarah studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. I'll run the story, but I need to verify the documents before I publish. Maya knew that would take time, and time was the one thing she didn't have. How long? I have a contact inside the courts. If I can get them to look at this, I might be able to push a federal judge to intervene by tomorrow. Maya nodded. But before she could say anything, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Her expression changed. It's Judge Arthur Reynolds. Maya stiffened. Reynolds was one of the highest-ranking federal judges in New Orleans. He had a reputation for fighting corruption. If anyone had the power to act on this, it was him. Sarah answered and put him on speaker. Sarah, I just reviewed the documents you sent over. His voice was heavy, serious. If this evidence is real, we're looking at one of the biggest judicial scandals in Louisiana history. Maya held her breath. Sarah met her gaze before replying, So what are you going to do? There was a pause on the other end. Then Reynolds spoke, his voice resolute. I'm reopening Darnell Carter's case. But we need more than a recording. We need a witness, someone willing to testify against Richard Whitmore. Maya already knew who that had to be. She stood, gripping her phone. I'll find Henry Wallace. Sarah's expression turned worried. Are you sure? If you go to him now, they'll know. Maya inhaled deeply. "I don't have a choice." She turned and walked out of the office, knowing that this was the most important moment of her career. She had to find Henry, and she had to do it before they did. Maya stepped out of the New Orleans Tribune, her mind racing. She had to find Henry Wallace. Now, Sarah had done her part. She had taken the story straight to Judge Arthur Reynolds, one of the most powerful figures in the federal judiciary. And with the evidence they had gathered, Reynolds had made his decision. He was reopening Darnell Carter's case. But there was still one problem. They needed a living witness to bring down Richard Whitmore, and Henry was the only person who could do it. Maya pulled out her phone and dialed his number. It rang 3 times. No answer. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel as she started the car. If Henry was gone, she had no witness. And if they knew that, she had to find him first, before they did. 3 days later. The New Orleans federal courthouse was packed. Reporters, lawyers, activists, even ordinary citizens. No one had expected this day to come. No one had believed that Richard Whitmore, one of the most powerful figures in the justice system, would ever stand trial. But today, he wasn't sitting on the judge's bench. He was sitting at the defendant's table. Maya stood inside the courtroom, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Across the aisle, Judge Arthur Reynolds presided over the hearing. In the press section, Sarah Milton sat poised, her sharp eyes tracking every development. And farther back, a group of wrongfully convicted men Maya had defended in the past, men who had lost years of their lives to rigged trials, watched in silence. But the most important person in the room was Henry Wallace. He entered the courtroom looking tired, worn, but resolute. He was the missing piece in bringing down Richard Whitmore. Maya glanced at Whitmore. He still held himself with that same air of control, but there was something different, something tight in his expression. For the first time, he wasn't the one in charge. The hearing began. The prosecutor stepped forward, fixing his gaze on Henry Wallace. "Mr. Wallace, you were once an investigator with the New Orleans Police Department, correct?" Henry nodded. "Yes." "Can you tell the court what you discovered regarding the case of Darnell Carter?" Henry took a deep breath and looked straight at Whitmore. Darnell Carter was never a murderer. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Reynolds struck. His gavel. "Order," the prosecutor pressed on. "Do you have evidence to prove that?" Henry nodded. "I have a recording from 1999. An officer coercing a witness, James Holloway, into falsely identifying Carter as the killer." Maya's fists clenched. This was the moment they had been waiting for. The prosecutor reached for the laptop and played the recording. A scratchy voice filled the silent courtroom. I didn't see anyone. I don't know who shot him." Then, another voice, cold, calculating. "Do you want to spend the rest of your life in prison for petty theft, James? Or do you want a fresh start? But all you have to do is say Darnell Carter did it. Cooperate, and we wipe your record clean. No warrants, no cops hunting you down. You walk free." The room fell into stunned silence. The prosecutor turned to Whitmore. "Judge Whitmore, would you care to explain why this recording directly contradicts the trial records you submitted in 1999? Whitmore clenched his jaw, but he said nothing. The prosecutor continued. "Furthermore, we have forensic reports proving that you deliberately concealed DNA evidence to frame Darnell Carter." A second prosecutor handed over the original forensic report, the one that had never been altered. This was the final blow. Judge Reynolds turned to Whitmore. "Do you have anything to say in your defense, Judge Whitmore?" Silence. The courtroom held its breath. Maya stared at Whitmore, watching for something. Regret, fear, anger, anything. But Whitmore just sat there, still, silent, like a trapped animal with nowhere left to run. Judge Reynolds's voice cut through the tension. The Judicial Review Board will launch a full investigation into every case you have ever presided over. As for Darnell Carter's conviction, I am overturning the verdict, effective immediately. Maya closed her eyes for just a second, letting the weight of it sink in. They had done it. Darnell Carter, a man who had spent 25 years behind bars for a crime he never committed, would finally walk free. But she also knew this was only one battle. There was still a war ahead. As the courtroom emptied, Maya stepped outside, breathing in the warm New Orleans air. Sarah appeared beside her, notebook in hand. "You did it, Maya." Maya exhaled, a small, tired smile crossing her lips. One man went down. But what about the system? How many more Darnell Carters are still buried in forgotten case files? Sarah nodded. So what happens now? Maya looked out at the city skyline, the lights of New Orleans flickering as if nothing had changed. But she knew everything had. "I keep going. As long as justice is for sale, I won't stop." 3 days after the historic trial, the morning sun filtered through the dense canopy of Jackson Square, casting a soft, golden glow over the cobblestone streets of New Orleans. The city moved as it always had, bustling, unbothered, but for those who had witnessed Richard Whitmore's downfall, something had changed forever. Maya Thompson sat at a small table in an old cafe in the French Quarter, a cup of coffee in front of her, long gone cold. She didn't drink it. She simply watched the crowd passing by, lost in thought. Across from her, Sarah Milton, investigative journalist for the New Orleans Tribune, set her notebook down with a sigh. "It's been 3 days, Maya. Have you thought about what comes next?" Maya gave a small, tired smile. "I never saw this as the end." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Then what's your next move?" Maya's gaze drifted into the distance, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Richard Whitmore is gone. But how many more like him are still in power? How many more wrongful convictions remain buried?" Sarah nodded. "You know what scares me the most, Maya? That this will all be forgotten. The public has a short memory. Give it a week, and they'll be distracted by the next scandal, the next big story. And then, things go back to the way they were." Maya's grip tightened. "Not if I'm still here." Sarah studied her for a long moment before letting out a small laugh. "Then I'll write about it. You keep fighting. I'll make sure no one forgets." Maya smiled, but deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. 3T3 p.m., New Orleans Human Rights League headquarters. The hall was packed, not just with lawyers and journalists, but with families. Families torn apart by wrongful convictions, exonerees who had spent years behind bars for crimes they didn't commit, and activists who had spent their lives fighting against a system that refused to change. They were all here for one reason: because justice had been manipulated for too long. Maya stepped onto the stage, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. Every face in the room carried a story. A life derailed by corruption. A truth that had been silenced. She took a slow breath. And then she spoke. "I used to believe that justice was absolute. That if we fought hard enough, the truth would always win." She paused, locking eyes with those in front of her. But Darnell Carter's case showed me something else. This system wasn't built to protect everyone. It was built to serve the powerful, and it is upheld by silence. The room was silent. Maya's voice grew stronger. I lost my job for pursuing the truth. I was threatened, followed, cast aside. But I didn't stop, and I never will. She took a steadying breath and spoke the words that would later be printed across headlines. To remain silent in the face of injustice is to be complicit in it. Applause erupted. Some stood. Some gripped each other's hands. Some wiped away tears. Maya glanced at the front row, where Darnell Carter's mother sat. Her eyes shone with pride. But beneath it was the weight of years of pain. Pain that would never fully fade. Maya continued, "We cannot let those who manipulate the justice system keep winning. If we don't stand up, how many more Darnell Carters will be locked away? How many more families will be torn apart? How many more lives will be stolen?" Her gaze landed on the journalists in the crowd. Justice isn't the work of one person. It belongs to all of us. If we let the truth stay buried, we become part of the problem. Another wave of applause. But this time, it wasn't just acknowledgement. It was a promise. Maya stepped down from the podium, knowing she had planted a seed. After the speech, Maya stepped outside, inhaling the crisp afternoon air. Sarah followed, flipping open her notebook. "So, what's next?" Maya exhaled, her voice carrying quiet steel. "I'm no longer a public defender, but I'm still a lawyer." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "You're opening your own firm?" Maya nodded. "A practice dedicated to investigating and defending the wrongfully convicted. No politics, no influence, no corruption." Sarah let out a small chuckle. "You really don't know how to be afraid, do you?" Maya folded her arms. "I do, but I fear silence more." Together, they watched the New Orleans skyline glow under the setting sun, the city moving forward as if nothing had changed. But Maya knew. Everything had. Richard Whitmore's story may have come to an end, but Maya's battle is just beginning. If you believe justice must be fought for, follow and share this message. Thank you for standing with Maya on her journey for the truth. Justice doesn't come freely. It takes those willing to rise and fight for it. Spread this story so more people understand. Justice isn't given. It's won.